Welcome to Open Conspiracy Radio. I am Daniel McPherson, and I am joined by my partner in thought crime, Lyle Keeney. Today we're going to talk about religion in general. We have some questions, hopefully some answers as well. So what do you got for us today, Lyle?
Well, I was doing what I often do, looking through the YouTube posts. They have what's called a community post or community section. Basically, people are putting up what amount to billboards. And this one said, quote, "Relationship with God, not religion," unquote. I thought, okay, I can probably understand where that's coming from, and that can be a good thing. But I replied to that. I said, yes and no. This raises the question of what is religion? Is religion some made-up garbage that you make yourself believe in, or you make others believe in to make yourself feel better or to control others? And if the Bible is true, and we believe it, now listen to this. If the Bible is true, and we believe it, is that religion? Are we religious? Or is it just we're connected with reality?
That really is the question, because most of us who are in a religious background were raised in that religious background. We know nothing else. We find out later in life that there's other religions, and we may stay with our own, or we may depart and go to another because it makes more sense. But what is it that makes religion, right?
Well, that's the question. And I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer that here, but it's an interesting question.
It is an interesting question. Well, it's one of those questions that you could do a man on the street.
Yeah.
And you would probably get 1,000 different answers.
You ask 1,000 people, you get 1,000 answers. Now, you can go to the dictionary, and I have, and it'll say things like, belief in a supernatural being or beings. And, that would basically be the dictionary definition. They'll go on with a little more detail than that, but that's the basis of it. Well, supernatural. Okay, well, if there are no supernatural beings, then again, it's belief in what is some things that are not true. If there are such things as what we would call supernatural beings, living outside of our natural experience, our observable experience, our immediately observable experience. Now see, then you get into, people will argue and say, well, I can observe God's work everywhere I look.
Yes.
And so then you get into these really difficult questions of what is observable reality? What are we observing?
And this sparked in my mind another phrase that I hear quite often these days is, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual.
Right. Okay, so yeah.
So what does that mean?
I think what it means is I don't observe an organized religion. I'm not going to sign on to some whole set of doctrines that's been designed and given to me by someone else. But I acknowledge that there is a spiritual aspect to existence.
So if that's the case, if you're willing to recognize that there is something supernatural, right, or there's something beyond what we can immediately perceive, how does that belief, that spiritual belief, translate into your actions? So I think...
Yeah. Well, it could be in 1,000 ways, right?
Well, yeah, because again, a person who says that they're spiritual but not religious is actually not, I believe, being very honest.
Well, he's being like the political moderate. He's saying, I will not adhere to this side or that side or any of these arguing, contentious religions. I will place myself above all of that so that I am not part of that, and still I will consider myself a spiritual person. So one example, how does that translate to actions? When I had the music store, I had a guy come in. He'd been a regular customer for a long time. I had him come in, and he was looking at buying an expensive instrument, musical instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And I showed it to him. We talked about it. He tried it. And then when he was trying to decide, he had to go off in a corner and sort of, silently pray or ask for spiritual guidance before he bought this instrument. And of course he ended up buying it. But I know that he wasn't a Christian. I know that he didn't belong to any church.
Okay.
And if you don't read the Bible, you don't belong to a religion, whatever it might be, and you call yourself a spiritual person, you can be led or fooled or whatever into justifying any action, I think, based on spiritual guidance, quote unquote.
Well, and also to say that you're spiritual but not religious is to say I don't follow anybody else's rules.
Yeah.
When it comes to matters of God or whatever you might believe in that particular regard.
Yeah, I mean, we get into a problem. What is that? Ephesians 4:14, that we henceforth be no more children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men. Now, sleight is E-I-G-H-T, in other words, and it goes on, and cunning craftiness. So sleight would be like sleight of hand, fooling people. Whereby they lie in wait to deceive, but speaking the truth in love, that we may grow up into him in all things, which is the head, even Christ. So it can be very dangerous to say that you are spiritual but not religious. But meaning, however, you don't belong to or you don't adhere to a specific religion.
Right.
So it comes down to a fundamental question. If there is truth, if there is an objective truth and a creator God, then there is only one objective truth and a creator God. Unless you think like the ancients, some of the ancients did, and some people currently, that there's a Penelope of gods, there is only one truth. And that's a very unpopular position to take.
It is very unpopular because this is what I see happening with the idea of being spiritual but not religious. It allows you to believe whatever it is that you need to believe in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine.
Exactly. So for those who aren't familiar with the word doctrine, doctrine just means teaching. So that which is taught to be believed.
It could be your own made-up doctrine, too.
Well, exactly. That's just it. In fact, we have Jesus saying in the Gospels that in vain do you teach as the commandments of God the traditions and doctrines of men.
That's a big one.
It's a big one. So and he says in vain. So that is the important word there in that whole phrase. You're doing it to no effect. It will have no effect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, so I posted, I want to get back a little bit, if you don't mind. I replied to this poster that was online on YouTube, Relationship with God, Not Religion. So that's what he's promoting.
Yeah.
And I can get behind that, but we have to be careful what it means. So I replied yes and no, it makes sense in one sense, but it raises the question of what is religion. And this other guy replied to me. He said, "It's a question I struggled with for a while. My conclusion is that religion is man-made to keep us in line. You must go to church on Sunday," was one of his examples. "Whereas the teachings of Jesus are a way to live and get on with our fellow man, and learning about what is worthwhile to each individual. I don't know, that's getting a little New Age-ish.
A little bit.
In my humble opinion, the Bible teaches us so much about a moral compass and living in a way to please God and not the world. Well, that's good. Which I find rather cruel, he goes on, and deceptive at times. Again, my opinion only. And that was his whole thing, and then he apologizes for going on a bit. No, and he says it's not an easy thing to answer. But he says, a moral compass and living in a way to please God and not the world. Well, that is in fact true, but he says, which I find rather cruel and deceptive at times. So he's like all of us. See, we've been subjected to sort of traditional religions which have gotten corrupted and mixed truth with error, and it is often cruel and deceptive. But the truth, is the truth ever cruel? It'll feel that way sometimes.
Right. It's never deceptive.
No, of course.
What is deceived is our perception, and that deception has been fostered for now millennia by very powerful forces that are completely out of our control.
Well, right from the beginning, right, with
Exactly.
Adam and Eve.
Exactly. So we have to be careful when we're examining these truths that we're not confusing our preconceived biases with what the Word is actually trying to tell us. Because I think quite often when a person reads the Word and they're putting their own interpretation on it based off of their traditions and known doctrine taught by men, then it can skew the message.
Oh, it can completely reverse the message in some cases.
Right. And so it's a dangerous thing to go into reading the Bible with pre-knowledge of the Bible. This is why I highly encourage people who do read the Bible or are going to read the Bible that a question that they keep in the forefront of their mind is, what is this trying to tell me?
The question, that's a good word.
Yes.
What is this trying to tell me? I can derive all kinds of meanings from it if I want to.
Right.
And they may or may not be remotely correct.
Right. So you gotta keep in mind, what is the intention of the words, right? What is the intention of the author? Now we know that these scriptures were written by men, but they were inspired by God to write them, and in many cases, they're quoting God directly.
Well, we know that, but
right, we know that.
we're backing up a bit, or we're getting way ahead. But go ahead.
So you got to keep in mind that if this is a divinely inspired book, if the Bible itself is divinely inspired, and the author of that divinity knows the end from the beginning, then we have to also keep that in the forefront of our mind, that this is a document that is not written just for the people who were alive back then. It's just as much a document for us today.
Oh, absolutely. It's
And
about
not-
us.
Right, and it's not just the prophecies that have yet to unfold. There's the entire Bible is there to be a lesson to us for our time and our situation.
Well, there are lots and lots of prophecies that are already fulfilled. And I mean, just Daniel 9 for one example. Well, Ezekiel and Isaiah, many fulfilled prophecies, starting with Genesis. Genesis 3 prophesizes the coming of the Messiah.
So I brought all that up because, when we're talking about religion, there's basically the big three that are going to come to mind, with a couple of other ones as well.
The Abrahamic religion.
Yes. So all those are going to be relying on the Bible. Many people do not like the idea of religion because what they believe religion has caused.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Christopher Hitchens is really big on this. He hates theism in general, no matter what, because look at all of the conflict and war and pain that's been caused in the name of religion and so on. And that's as infantile an argument as saying, oh, I don't know, look at the pain that this redhead woman caused me 10 years ago, and now I'm going to hate all redheads from now on. You can fill in the blanks. It can be race, religion, people from a certain geographical area. That's bigotry.
Right.
By definition.
But you know that the retort back to that is the sheer numbers.
Yeah. The sheer numbers of religions is a big issue. And I wanted to bring this up, and you just did, because, look, again, we go back to the fundamental question: is there an objective truth?
Right.
Or is it all just my truth and your truth? And so there's 8 billion different truths on the planet, because that's how many people are around. No. If there is an objective truth, that truth will be extremely valuable. And anything of value, this is kind of a thing that I say now and then in many different conversations, anything of value will have its counterfeits. And the more valuable it is, the more and cleverer will be those counterfeits. So let's say we've got 10,000 religions. Does the fact that 9,999 of them are false mean that the one is any less true?
No, because, well, if there's an objective reality.
If there is an objective reality, and if there is one narrative that is true, and all the thousands of others are false, does the falsity of the others make the true one less true?
No, and objective reality, by its very definition and logic, states that only one narrative is true.
Yeah, well, Jesus himself said, if you're not with me, you're against me. That's the kind of speech we don't do, in politically correct society. You don't ever say that.
Oh no, it's about compromise.
It's all about
unity and coming together, bipartisanship.
So, again, if there is an objective truth, then the ecumenical movement would only make sense if the religions involved are all made up. Think about that. Let that sink in for 10 years. Mm-hmm. We don't have that much time on our podcast.
Right. But no, your point is valid. If there's exactly one truth and 10,000 in error,
mm-hmm.
what makes more sense to unite around?
Yeah. The error.
It
becomes a liars' club, a community of the delusional.
Nice.
And certainly they do often look just like that. And that's why so many people, Christopher Hitchens and whoever, really thinks he's cool, it's understandable. If you have 10,000 false religions and one true, this is a hypothetical situation. Just think of the logic of it here. If there are 10,000 false and only one true, then aren't most people going to conclude that religion is just a bunch of hooey?
They should.
Okay, we'll go back to the redhead. If I meet 5 redheads and I perceive that they are all doing me wrong in some way, I could be right or wrong, right? Doesn't matter.
Right.
Then I'm going to conclude that redheads are just terrible people. I apologize to you redheads out there. This is just, I got to come up with something for these hypotheticals. Okay, let's say blue hairs. Well, there's blue-haired people too, so.
You're not going to win. You're just not going to win.
I'm not going to win.
So you're redheads, yes.
Yeah, if you're one race and 10 people of another race have done you harm, are you going to think favorably of the one who is good? Or are you going to be highly suspicious of them?
Highly suspicious.
It's just natural sort of I mean, there's a certain reasoning behind it, but there's also a certain ignorance behind it, because you have to be able to discern right from wrong, good from bad, harmful from helpful
And
on an individual basis.
Right. And how does one do that? How does one know what's right from wrong?
Well,
See, we come back to
you get back to the fundamental questions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another question that could be asked on top of the what is religion, is there an objective reality? The next question to ask would be, is there an objective morality?
Yeah. Objective morality. Some people would almost see that as a contradiction in terms.
They would, but it's not.
No. Yeah, wow. We broach these subjects. It's about all we can do right now is broach these subjects.
Yeah, we're asking questions. We're trying to provoke you to think
Yeah.
about this, because for too long we haven't. We've been asleep for way too long, and it's time to wake up. It's just time to wake up. The time is short. We don't have time to dilly-daddle, so we need you to be putting on your critical thinking skills. And unfortunately, that means covering some topics for which we ourselves are not completely in the light on, but we do know where to point you to that does have the light. So that's about the best that we can offer, because we don't have the answers. We've been given some answers.
Well, we'll tell you that the answers are in the Bible.
Yeah, we'll tell you that.
Yeah.
We'll definitely tell you that.
Absolutely. Now, some people would say, well, objective reality cannot involve the Bible.
Well, that would be interesting.
I think you can say that only because you don't really know what's in the Bible.
Don't know what's in the Bible, don't know about the last 30 years in archaeology, geology, chemistry,
Yeah.
physics,
Yeah,
astrophysics.
A lot of the recent discoveries are pointing more and more to the Bible.
Yes. Now this is this is dangerous, because what have we been talking about? What is religion? Well, there's lots of religions that subscribe to the Bible,
Or say they do.
or say they do. Say that the Bible is their guide stone for all matters that are spiritual and moral. But is that true? What is it that we hear often as a complaint against Christianity in general? It's very hypocritical, or at least its participants are hypocritical.
Right. Yeah, hypocrisy is another charge against religions in general, or really mostly just Christians.
Right.
I don't know that I've heard massive charges against modern Judaism or Islam saying that they're a bunch of hypocrites. It's kind of out there, but
It's out there.
mainly when we're talking about religious people being hypocrites, that charge is leveled at Christians.
And why is it leveled at Christians? Because they know, at least on a certain level, that Jesus is asking more of his followers than other religions have.
I would venture to say that, although I haven't really studied the Quran or the rabbinical teachings,
Well, all of the other religions focus on action.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is the only one who focuses on intention.
Intention and faith.
So, matters of the heart, matters of relationship between man and God, which in turn repairs the relationship between man and man.
Yeah, it would. Absolutely. And in fact, where you have, Western civilization has been generally very peaceful. It's also always been a mixed civilization, so, take it for that as well. But peaceful and prosperity kind of go with Western civilization, and Western civilization is pretty closely operated, or has been anyway, maybe I should say, operating on Christian principles, Protestant Christian principles.
And yes, that's the crux of the matter when it comes to what Western civilization is, what
Yeah.
Western civilization has allowed for.
Yep. And I say Protestant Christian principles because that's biblical Christian. People, listen. I hear so often people use the term the church, the Christian church. There is no the church. Stop it with that. Please. You look at the Protestant nations, most of Western Europe, the UK for a time, the United States was, United States was originally settled by people escaping religious persecution. They were Christians escaping persecution by purported Christians.
That's right.
So where's the church in that? There's one side trying to exterminate the other. And you're going to lump them both together and call it the church? No. That's idiotic. It's not only wrong, it is extremely ignorant and idiotic.
It is an ignorance that has been fostered and nurtured
Yes.
to
Widely
the nth
promoted.
degree. Yeah, this is not an accident.
No.
So the only reason we're having to ask this question, what is religion in the first place, is because of the muddling of man's traditions, ambitions, goals, agendas, all of a selfish nature,
Yep.
taking advantage of the fact that, and this is so insidious, taking advantage of the fact that they can take aspects of religion, mix it with their error, their lies, their deceptions,
Mm-hmm.
and because of the ignorance of the world to what the truth is, they will always be able to find followers.
They will carry us about with every wind of doctrine by the sleight of men and cunning craftiness wherein they lie in wait to deceive.
Comes right back to it. Pretty much every topic that you could ever think to speak upon in the goings-ons of men, the Bible is going to have something to say about it, and it's going to be profound, and
Yep.
it's going to be dead-on accurate.
Yep. Now there are cases in the Bible, and I bring this up because the accusers will be out there, responding to you.
Mm-hmm.
There are parts of the Bible that appear to contradict other parts. We look at the preponderance of the evidence. The preponderance of the Scripture says one thing on a given subject. And what is the standard for witnesses and convicting of someone of a crime?
2 or more witnesses.
2 or more witnesses. Use that standard for evaluating Scripture. We're not saying the Bible, which is written, inspired by God, written by the hand of man, translated by the hand of men.
Multiple times.
Yeah. And no, we're not going to accept the argument that it's been too long and it's been misinterpreted too many times in too many ways for us to have any confidence in it. That's a bunch of hooey. And if you really understood what the Bible is saying, if you understood how many names and places and dates are very specific in the Bible, you wouldn't say that. So if you're saying that, I would say, shut up, please. I've done it myself. Look, I'm not one to judge. I'll say shut up because that's what I had to do, because I was one of those vehement anti-Christian scoffers and accusers. I was right up there with the best of them. So if you're one of them, I was one of them too. I can't judge.
Oh, well, same here. I wasn't too much of a scoffer myself, but the answer that I would have provided once upon a time to the question of what religion is would have been, well, religion is nothing but a man-made institution formed for the specific purpose of controlling large portions of the population.
I remember telling my kids that very thing.
Yeah, and everything that goes along with religion.
And that's right.
And that's right.
It's true.
It's true. It's not false to say that.
It's just that there happens to be an objective truth.
Right. Now, many people would call that a religion, but is recognizing reality a religious endeavor?
To someone who disagrees with you, yes.
Right.
So now we use religion, the term religion, as a cudgel, as an accusation. Here's an example. Okay, well, I'll just ask some questions. So is belief in a creator God, what we would call a supernatural? And by the way, just because we use the term supernatural doesn't mean it is. Right, so I'll use a secular example. When the hobbits met Galadriel, they wanted to see some elf magic.
Oh.
Galadriel made it clear that she didn't consider it magic. She spoke to the hobbits as well. This is what you think is magic. And so likewise, with God and the actions of the angels, we might call it supernatural. Would they?
Or is it just another day?
Just another day for them.
Right.
But anyhow, I digress. So the question, is belief in a creator God religion? Well, everybody would say yes. Okay. Is belief that nothing created everything, this is the Big Bang evolution paradigm, is belief that nothing created everything, nothing which we cannot see, which we've never observed, which we cannot test, you cannot measure it with any instrument, created everything spontaneously, and then through dark energy that we cannot observe caused the expansion of the universe, and through dark matter that we cannot observe
keeps it together
and keeps the orbits and the galaxies doing what we observe them to do. Is that any less fantastic? Because we who believe in the Creator God would say, well, we can observe His actions. We can explain our existence through His actions and His Word. We can have confidence in His Word because we see the evidence of it in nature. You don't, but we do. An example, I'll just give one. Shall we give the one example in geology?
Sure.
Once you see it, and you will see it everywhere, you can't unsee it.
It's pretty unseeable.
Go to a large river canyon. We have a few of those here in the Northwest.
We do.
Or just go online and look at pictures of the Grand Canyon. Or you can find this on every continent on the planet. And look at those layers where you have a deep gorge that's been cut out. And look at those layers that we are told are hundreds of millions of years of accumulation.
Hundreds of millions.
Hundreds of millions. And look at how straight and flat the boundaries between each layer are.
And then look at the top layer.
And then look at the top layer and how it's deeply eroded. But somehow all those layers with millions of years from one to the next are just perfectly smooth. No erosion.
Razor.
Pretty amazing world it must have been back then for hundreds of millions of years where there was no erosion.
Right. Now, the only comeback that I've really been able to hear...
Oh, you heard one. I've never heard one.
Yeah, it's pretty weak, though. So, it's interesting. They lean in on our own argument of catastrophism. To where they say, well, the reason that you have such sharp boundary layers is because a majority of the time that would be there isn't actually there because it got wiped off because of some catastrophic event.
Okay. Well, that's an awful lot of global catastrophes, though.
It is, and it's a problem because you run into the same problem. Well, if each one of these layers resulted in a catastrophic event at the boundary line, didn't life have to start all over again? or at least got diminished to a
Right.
point that diversity is going to have to.
Diversity would be knocked way back. Well, the naturalists do believe in multiple mass extinction events,
Yes.
but one for each layer?
Yeah. Doesn't hold up too much.
But the Bible says there was one global catastrophe, and that, therefore, okay, well, what would we expect?
What would we? Yes.
What would we expect? So we're going to ask more questions. What would we expect to see if the depths of the earth opened up and water was gushing out? And this is what the Bible says. Rains are coming from above. The earth splits open. Water is gushing. What would we expect to see? Unbelievable. I mean, massive, massive, way beyond anything we can imagine. Tsunamis reverberating all around the earth in different directions.
Right. Massive breakup of the ground. You know, just from the ground breaking open from this high pressure water, just that event alone is going to gravelize in a lot of places the top surface.
It's going to plane off the surfaces of the planet
Yeah.
all over,
And then now add the water,
starting with the depths of the sea where this is occurring.
right?
So we would expect to see layers and layers and layers of dead things, starting with marine life, because that's where it started.
Yep.
And then coming up onto the land, planing those surfaces off, killing everything,
Yep.
and burying various animals in layer after layer after layer of just graveyards of massive death. And we would expect to see these layers deposited by water,
Yep.
sometimes water sorted.
And water sorted is one of those things that everybody has seen it, but they might not have really thought about it. You take a whole bunch of different sized particles from gravel to fine sand. You put it in a bucket. You give it a good shake. What's going to happen? Well, the gravel is going to sink directly to the bottom.
Heavy
And
stuff at the
heavy
bottom,
stuff at the bottom,
lighter at the top.
and lighter at the top. So that's what it means to be
Water
water sorted. And this is exactly what we see in most of the layers of rock when we look
Many
at these
of them.
cutouts.
It would depend on the consistency of the slurry, right? If it's a thick mud, we wouldn't see so much of that.
Right. So what we're touching on here is the idea of somewhat of a paradigm shift, as
Yep.
in looking at the evidence and coming up with an alternative explanation for what that evidence is showing.
Using Bible heuristics, which is the same thing as asking, if Noah's flood were true, what would we expect to see? That's Bible heuristics. What would we be looking for? Another thing we'd be looking for is some of those layers would be deposited as crossbeds. And that's another thing we in fact do see. And we would expect to see the layers very rapidly deposited and therefore very flat and very straight between the layers, which is what we see.
Right. With no time for erosion.
Mm-hmm.
And all mostly underwater.
Mm-hmm.
Mostly.
Anyhow, and we'd expect to see a worldwide chalk bed,
Yes. Huh.
chalk layer.
And you might ask, well, why do you think that's such an obvious thing that you would see? Well, because everything, according to the Bible, was underwater.
Mm-hmm.
And we already observe what happens currently underwater is that you get these calcium deposits from the marine life, and that eventually builds up a layer over time.
Yep, and it's been observed that chalk in the right conditions can build up very, very quickly.
Yes. Yes.
We're talking about a flood that lasted a year, and then the aftermath would have lasted, well, I mean, we're still in the aftermath, so
Right.
thousands of years.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, we're getting a little bit in the weeds, but the main point in all of this is to be asking the questions. If the Bible were true, what would we expect to see?
Right.
And that's just one example.
Right. And we bring this example up again, to tie it into our theme, is believing the truth, seeing the truth for what it is, religion, or is it just recognizing the truth for what it is?
Assuming that it's true. Assuming that there is an objective truth, and assuming that we're looking at it in the Bible and believing it, is that religion? Is that any more religion than believing in the Big Bang, which cannot be observed? I mean, you say we can observe the aftermath, but we can't observe nothing creating everything. If you can produce a laboratory experiment where you can create the conditions, see, this is called experimental reproducivity or something to that effect. If you can reproduce the conditions, see, this is science, right? You can reproduce the conditions where everything comes from nothing, or where anything at all comes from nothing.
Right.
Then let's see it. Well, and then, of course, fairly, they could say, well, if you can reproduce, God creating light from darkness, then, let's see. Well, you'll have to ask God for that because we don't have control over him.
Right.
It's a fair question, though.
It is a fair question.
So we would say, again, look at the Bible prophecies and how so many of them have already been fulfilled.
Right. Look at it from a scientific perspective. Analyze.
Look at it seriously.
Right. Yeah, right. Analyze the information that is actually being presented. Does any scientist worth his weight in salt just look at the conclusion of a peer-reviewed study and assume that is in fact the conclusion, or is he going to dive into the raw data, see the methods used,
there you go,
try to reproduce those methods, and see if he's able to reproduce that data?
That is science.
That is science.
And so often it's demanded of us that we trust the science just because they declare it to be so from the mountaintop.
Right. That's not science. That's religion.
That is. Absolutely.
So if we're going to talk about religion being...
wait a second. We just defined religion. Believing in some garbage that's not true.
Well, I think that it's fair to say that in current parlance, religion is, in fact, just a bunch of made-up BS that you believe in to help you sleep at night, or, that's the most benign reason,
That's
right?
the most benign. It gets way worse.
It gets way worse from there. So when a person is approaching you with some fundamental truths from the Bible, which hopefully we'll be able to do for you here in the future ourselves, but if somebody else approaches you with the truth from the Bible, have the objective, rational, logical mindset to take a look at what is being presented as opposed to the emotional gut reaction that you've had towards anything religious. Because there is a distinction between what religion is today and the truth.
Oh, yeah. And I would hope that any religious person should be able to agree with that, even if they don't have the same religion.
I would hope so.
So in part of my notes, this goes to this. If people of each religion truly believed that they had the truth, they would reject any other religion which conflicted with their own. And that is quite in conflict with the ecumenical movement. The ecumenical movement says, let's all come together on any points of contact. That is, any point that we can agree on. And then we'll sort out the doctrine in heaven.
Yes, this exact language is being used. I mean, word for word, this is the language that is being used.
Yeah. And again, if there is one objective truth, and we're going on the assumption that most people can agree that there is one objective truth. If you don't believe there is an objective truth, then I'm sorry, you're going to have to...
Well, we can't have a conversation.
We can't have a conversation. That's right.
Because...
Yeah, turn it off.
Right, exactly. Because
you can't talk about anything, really.
No, because if you don't believe in an objective reality, then that means that your reality is subject to change at any moment. That's why they call it subjective reality.
Right. That's a good point.
And yeah, we can't, nobody, it doesn't matter if it's only one party that believes that that is the case. All it does is lead to chaos. That's all it can ever do, is lead to chaos.
Yeah, there are people promoting it because they want chaos.
That's a topic for another day.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, we could go 1,000 different directions here. But now, if we say that there is an objective reality, and if we say that it's represented in the Bible, people will shake the finger at us, and they will say, who are you to say that you have the truth? Well, no other religion does. I mean, there are religions that are thousands of years older than you, and then you come along and say you have the truth. That's unfair. It's logically suspect.
Its probability is very low.
Probability is low because if there's 1,000 religions, see, that's the thing about it. If you want to propagate falsehood, you just tell a whole bunch of lies.
Right.
Now the guy standing next to you, he's telling the truth. Yeah, the red car hit the blue car, and you're on the street at the site of an accident, and you tell 1,000 different lies about what happened. You're both there to observe it. Now the guy that's telling the truth is going to be perceived as having a very, very highly unlikely story because there are 1,000 alternative explanations here.
Right.
So the liar always wins the mathematical battle there. He always has the preponderance of the narratives.
Yes. Yeah, and that's the point I wanted to raise. Because the truth can only be what it is. That's what defines the truth as the truth.
Yeah. Oh, that's unfair. It's unfair to all those lies that are out there.
Oh, very unfair.
It's unfair to all of the error and misinterpretations that should be given equal shrift, right? They should be given equal credibility.
Right.
How often have we heard that? Since the 1960s, how often have we heard?
Yes.
All religions are equally valid. All opinions are equally valid. All beliefs are equally valid.
Yep.
Because it defines you, the person, and no one has the right to take that away from you. If you believe that there's a pink elephant standing in the middle of the hotel lobby, no one has the right to take away your personally held belief. You know who says that? Liars say that.
Well, of course, because liars need that wiggle room.
And so if we're going to bring all religions together, I got a list here, if I may. Ecumenism. By the way, that's it's a Catholic word. It means bringing all religions together under one. And who's that going to be? Yeah, we all know. Ecumenism must accept all manner of paganism, conflicting doctrines. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by me. And then Muhammad comes along and says something totally different. And of course the Eastern and other religions come along and say totally different things about it.
And the Jews never believed.
And yeah, they're going to have a problem with that because they're going to say the Messiah hasn't arrived yet. So conflicting doctrines. And then some things that we consider as in the Christian-based societies, and I will go to the mat on saying that the Western world consists of Christian-based societies.
Yes.
Argue with me all you want. I've heard it already. They'll have to accept things that we consider immoral. Because there are religions that are really into the free love, spiritual stuff, sex, magic, tantric sex, the peyote cultures of certain Native Americans. You know, they're officially accepted by the federal government because of it's their religion. The peyote is part of what you might call a sacrament to their religion. And so we have to accept that. So drugs and what we would call deviant sex, prostitutes in churches. There's a thousands of years old.
I was going to say ancient practice.
Yeah, ancient tradition, you see. It's tradition. And child abuse, child sacrifice is well-established religious practice. And so you could go on, but I mean, that's enough, right? So the ecumenical movement has to accept all of that because, you know, we all serve God in our own way, we will say.
Right.
And that's where I can really sympathize with the atheists and the people who are just despise religion, because there's a lot of despicable religious practices in the world.
Yes. Which is why we have to have this conversation, because we have to make a distinction between what God is and how he has been used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, big difference.
Huge difference. What God is not anything. It is basically the exact opposite of how he's been used.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it took me, how old was I when I even first started reading the words of Jesus seriously? 55?
Yeah,
somewhere-ish. And I had lived my whole life prior to that, having been raised Catholic, and then thought that was ridiculous, becoming more atheist and dabbling in, hippie-style spiritism, things that I later came to learn were Jesuit, Loyolan-type doctrines, spiritual formation. Anyway, I won't get into it. But
that topic is a multi-episode deep dive into all kinds of shenanigans.
Right, so Jesus says that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father but by him. In multiple ways, in several scriptures, he claims equality with God. In other words, he says he's God. He never used the words, I am God, but actually he used the words, I am
many times.
Is the name of God.
Mm-hmm.
So don't try to argue, because, we'll just hit you with a ton of scriptures. He accepted worship, which even the angels would not do. That's a way of saying that he's God. He calmed the storms, heals the gravely ill, raises the dead, casts out demons. He presumed to forgive sins. Well, he did forgive sins because he had the authority, and only he. So on and so forth. So he says he's the only way. And he says he is God in multiple ways, like dozens of ways in the Bible.
Both in word and in deed.
Indeed, yeah, both. Yeah, by his actions and words, yeah. And he was crucified for blasphemy, among other things.
Which is to claim
you're
God.
Yeah. And so, you cannot, I want to leave everybody with this. You cannot say that Jesus is just another prophet, or that you think Jesus is cool, but there's other paths to salvation, other paths to God. Because Jesus himself said, no, there aren't any other paths to God. There are no other ways to salvation. It is through him alone. So you cannot take that sort of halfway position. Jesus won't let you. His words tell you so. You have to either assert that he is an egregious liar and a blasphemer of the highest order, or you have to believe that he is exactly what he says he is. There's no in-between. He left you no room for any in-between.
Well, there it is. There is an objective reality, and that part of that objective reality is Jesus Christ is, in fact, Lord God. Now, this fact has been used and twisted and maligned in order to establish all those nasty things that we all hate about religion. But the truth still remains. Jesus is Lord God, and I would never serve a God that wasn't willing to come down here and die for me. But he did, so I do. And that God told me to make disciples of the world, the whole world. That's you. Whoever manages to listen to this. Jesus is calling you.
Mm-hmm.
He wants you to be his disciple. What's a disciple? Somebody who practices the discipline that has been presented to them. We only recognize the truth as we have had it revealed to us. That's all we can do. Are we religious? God forbid. But we are bound to the truth. And Jesus Christ himself says that he is the truth. He also says that God's word is the truth, and that God's commandments are the truth.
Mm-hmm. And make sure you read the right version.
So, 10 Commandments, the Scriptures, and Jesus. These are all objectively fundamental facts of our reality. What you do with that information is completely up to you, but we highly encourage you to take the time, open up a Bible, see what it has to say with the questions we've had in our discussion today, and discover for yourself what God has in store for you.
Amen.